it's never really about how you do it. It's what you can do, right? And as an investor, you want to know that the how, just to be sure, or to have a high enough confidence level that it's actually potentially achievable. But it's always like, what problem can I solve for people with this?
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host for the VC Next podcast. And today we have Marc Cohen with us. Marc is a partner at Unbundled VC. He's a two-time AI operator turned VC investor with a 1.98x multiple and 54% IRR. He did his master's in AI in the year 2001 from the University of Sussex. He also co-created the world's best poker AI before DeepMind existed. In this episode, we talk about Marc's story and how he started investing, how to separate signal from noise in the AI hype, how Marc uses ChatGPT to get things done, some exciting portfolio companies that he has backed, and lots more. So, without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. This episode is sponsored by my own podcasting agency called Podcast 10x, where I help VCs start and run their own podcast. While I was running VC 10x, this podcast that you're listening to right now, I asked my VC guests, why don't you start your own podcast? I mean, it's the best form of marketing for VCs. As they say, VC is a people play more than even a capital play. A podcast enables you to put your people at the front, your portfolio founders, your partners, and co investors. It's a great way to build a brand and win competitive deals. It activates all your marketing channels in a single shot, be it YouTube or blog post or newsletter or social media. Everything gets activated in a single shot. And I get the same response from all the VCs that it's a lot of work and we don't have the time for it. I said, all right, let me handle the work for you from pre recording, editing, publishing to making social media clips. All you have to do is show up on a call, hit record, do the recording using the well researched outline we provide you with, and you're done. We handle everything else. You know what they said? All right, let's give it a shot. So if you are a VC and want to up your marketing and branding game, I'd love to work with you. And if you're thinking there are too many VC podcasts already, remember there are way more VC firms out there. And if you're not standing out, you're losing out. So if you want to work with me on starting your podcast, go to podcast10x.com and book a call today. I'll add the link in the description and show notes below. Look forward to working with you. Hey, Marc, so good to have you on the VC 10X podcast. How are you doing?
Really well. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you on. To start things off, can we first have your story and how you got into investing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a long time ago, I was at Cambridge. I studied maths at Cambridge. When I left, I kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I ended up in a job in the city in the financial markets in London as an interest rate swap trader at banks, and I did that for about 7 years. And then in 2001, I quit to go do a master's in AI. Slightly random, not claiming the sort of the great prescience that I knew exactly what was going to be happening today and when that was going to happen, but it was certainly an area that I was interested in. Actually called up Cambridge, do you have any courses? They did not have any courses back then, but got them to recommend where the good courses were, and ended up doing that at Sussex University in Brighton, where the course turned out to be run by one of Geoffrey Hinton's mentors, who's sort of Geoffrey Hinton, sort of now known as one of the sort of godfathers of modern AI. We did not know that at the time, but yeah, it turned out to be a pretty well credentialed course. At the same time, I met my wife. She was doing her undergrad, so good decision for a number of reasons. So I hung around till she'd finished. Then was like, well, I should probably go earn some money again. Went back into financial markets, joined a small proprietary trading group, and built up the systematic trading side of that from scratch to become most, and then all of that business. And I was doing a side project in poker and AI at the same time with an old uni friend, and we built what was then actually the world's best poker AI. This predates DeepMind, so on like a £2,000 like home PC. So no, not quite the same processing power that people are throwing at problems nowadays. But that was a fun problem, and I brought the friend I did with that with into the trading business, and we built the sort of AI version of that trading system. I was doing that until about 6.5 years ago. last 8 years of that lived and worked from Lugano in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. Then moved here to Guernsey, where I now live with my wife and 4 sons. And again, was not quite sure what I was going to do next. Started doing some angel investing, got brought on as advisor, and then partner at a small VC out here. And then a couple of summers ago, made the decision to sort of strike out on my own and invest my own capital. And that's what I've been doing. And so far, that's been going pretty well.
That's pretty awesome. And at the time when you're going for doing your course in AI, what was the idea of AI in your head back then?
What was the idea in my head? So it was actually neural nets. People were still using neural nets even back then. You couldn't quite do what you could do with them today. Some of that was technique, although most of it was processing power, actually. The techniques they use now are still built on the ones that were being used back then. Obviously, there have been some developments, but what was the idea of AI? I mean, it was not really much different to what the idea is today. That is this something that could become at some point, obviously a lot further away from it, but like the, more intelligent than humans, right? Could be the most intelligent thing at some point, and that was certainly a more theoretical discussion then than it is today.
Right, right. Very interesting. And how do you look at how AI has developed over the years? Kind of slowly at first, then all at once. That can be said about it, that it had a breakthrough moment with ChatGPT coming in and it getting into hands of normal people and people realizing, oh, this is what it can do, right? So, what's your perspective on that? That was this development steady and on the backside of it, and there was just one breakthrough moment where the public could use it and therefore it got popularized, or was it something else?
So it's a combination of things. It's a combination of processing power because you can do a lot more, even with the techniques we were using back in like 2001, too. You could do a lot more. And there have been a number of sort of step changes as well, where various techniques have been developed where you're like, okay, we can do this now, and this is interesting, even without any sort of progress in processing power. And then I guess the third aspect is sort of someone actually going, well, not just that, but we're going to throw a lot of money at this and see if we can make something interesting, which is really OpenAI, right? Where they've been going for actually 7, 8 years, I think, since the company was founded. I might have that slightly wrong, but it's something of that scale. But like way before we saw these visible results. So there was a leap of faith required there, both on behalf of the people running the companies and the investors, that actually, one, there's anything to be found here at all, and two, that these techniques that are doing sort of probably on like day one or even year one or year two, were doing sort of vaguely interesting, but probably wasn't really much you could do with it back then. But that when you scaled and applied, a lot more sort of processing power to it, that this would actually develop into something like we see today. So I'd say there's 3 factors: the sort of general Moore's law of sort of increasing processing power, some step changes in techniques, and then a sort of combination of sort of founders plus investors going, actually, it's time to push a button now. And even though it might be like 3, 4, 5 years time, and we don't know if it will get there, but it's worth throwing some time and money and energy at this to see whether it goes somewhere. So I'd say it's a combination of those 3 things.
Got it. Insightful. And talking about the AI hype today, almost every startup is trying to claim to be an AI startup, right? How do you look at the AI hype? How much of it do you think is real, and how much of it do you think is made up?
So yeah, there's a few different things there to unpack, which are, one of them is, yes, you're right. Every startup is claiming to be an AI startup, and whether they are or whether they're not is an open question. And I kind of don't blame them, because investors want to see that. And so they're just, to a certain extent, they're giving the investors what they want. I think really, and this sort of touches on my investment philosophy, it's never really about how you do it. It's what you can do, right? And as an investor, you want to know that the how, just to be sure, or to have a high enough confidence level that it's actually potentially achievable. But it's always like, what problem can I solve for people with this? And so then going back to the hype, there's kind of two aspects of that. One is, yes, all the investors want to see it, which is kind of a problem. But actually, what's true is that you really can build a whole load of stuff that you could never build before, right? And so that makes this kind of a pretty interesting time to be investing either in startups that are directly using Gen AI to solve those problems, or even, and this will increasingly become the case over time, basically every software developer is sort of way more productive. You can see that that's going to be that's going to expand over time, where in like 2, 3, 4 years time they'll be 5 times as productive as they were a couple of years ago, right? So there'll also be a whole set of things that just couldn't be built because you needed to hire 10 software developers on one day and it was too expensive and you were never going to raise the money to do that, and maybe you only need 1 or 2. Or maybe even if you can't develop yourself, the tools are there that if it's simple enough, you don't need anything at all. And so there's a whole load of more additional experimentation that people can do. So there's the two aspects. There's the ones that directly use Gen AI to build products, and then there's the ease in general of building software-driven products, which is going to accelerate as well, which both makes it cheaper to build, and so there's a load more opportunities actually, and also broadens the set of people that can build them, because you will be able to build some things without that technical foundation. Apologies, I'm in one of those pods where I need to wave my arm every now and again. But and so you've got that additional set of things and that broader range of people that can build. So in terms of its effect on what the world and all the potential things that can be built, I think that hype is real. However, that doesn't mean as an investor you should just throw your money at anything that someone sticks AI in front of. It still needs to be solving a problem that someone's going to pay money for the solution of.
Yeah, absolutely. As someone who kind of belongs to the AI space, and these days a lot of VCs are investing into AI, but you're kind of an insider, right? How do you look at the space as an investor? Where do you think the signal is? Where do you think the big innovation is going to come from? Disruption is going to come from? And where do you think are the kind of startups which will probably not get the kind of benefit AI promises to achieve, right? So where do you see the signal versus noise in the AI hype?
That's a good question, and I think it's hard to know. It's very hard to know. I think it's always hard to know as an investor before you've seen a company to go, oh, these are the areas where like the developments are going to be, or the things that I'm going to want to go and invest in. And I think that sort of, in terms of the hype, I really do believe it's changing the world sort of faster than ever. And that means there's more uncertainty about what the future will look like for good reasons, right? Because these things only happen if people are building products that actually people want to and companies want to use. But it does lead to actually greater uncertainty about what the world will look like in 5 years' time than is normally the case. The way I will always look at it is not go, these are the specific areas I want to look to invest in. Is I want to hear it from the founders, and those founders often know a market much better than I do, right? And go, okay, this is a problem that I know is real in this industry and that I can solve using the existing technology set. And so I tend to focus that way. I don't like to try and predict exactly where it will be, because if you're trying to predict it, you're probably predicting the same thing as like everybody else is, which means where's your edge? And what I want to do is hear from the founders. They're going to know in certain industries and certain problems way better than I am, and go, okay, that's an interesting problem. This is something I should pursue a bit further.
Right, totally. And to give us a sense of the kind of investing you do, can you give us examples of the companies you have backed and the reason you backed them?
Yeah, and so I'll give you one example of one that's doing really well. A business called Runner, RUNNA. Most of the things I've invested in are sort of B2B businesses. This is actually B2C. Very simple concept. It's the sort of AI running coach in your pocket, right? And really the sort of AI adaptive bits are being built out now. But this was a like and this isn't a good example of like why I'm not trying to find like choose ahead of time where the areas I'm going to invest in are, because a founder came to me and said, friend of mine has started this business, is running this business, and I run every day, and I've tried everything else in the world, and like I've never stuck with anything, but this is really good, and I know the founder, and I rate him. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll go talk to them. But I wasn't that excited by the idea. If you'd said to me, Mark, do you think you're going to go and invest in this? I'd have gone, nah, doesn't sound that exciting to me. And then I met the founder. I saw the growth. The business model made sense. The unit economics were already great. And they're now like the fastest growing thing that I've basically ever seen. Already profitable. They're like currently, this is a few weeks ago, they were like hiring another 35 people in London and Boston, and they don't need to raise money to go do that. They've just got the money to go do that. And so I think that's an example of a thing where if you'd asked me before I met them, are you ever likely to invest in anything like this? I'd have gone, nah, probably not. And then you meet them and everything makes sense, right? The market's big enough, they're growing fast, it's great founders, like literally checks every single box. And so I think the thing that I try and do is go, well, what first principles? Like, what are the underlying principles that I'm looking for? Does it meet all those criteria? And if the answer is yes, I'm interested. And it's one of the things I try not to predict. This is the area, because then it you basically are sort of enforcing biases on yourself that mean when something like that comes up, you're more likely to miss it.
Right, totally. That's an interesting approach to being open to all different kinds of investments and at least giving it a consideration before forming a decision, right? And when you're evaluating a deal, what are the key things you look for?
So you are looking for great founders, and if you're investing early, like I do, which is pre-seed and seed, like that's half or at least half of it, right? And it's always a lot easier to talk about the business aspects, and there's a lot more you can dig into. But at the end of the day, you have to go back to, if in doubt and you're sort of wavering, go back to between two things. You should always go back to founder, 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 founder. But in terms of the business, you want to have a sort of large enough market. I know this this sort of video podcast is called 10x. I'm looking for things that have 100x potential, and if they've got more, then great. And of course, we know that most things won't end up with that big an outcome, but the way I look at it is if it has 100x potential, every now and again that might actually happen. But if everything doesn't go right, you could still get 10 or 20x out of it. And that's why I'm looking for things with that sort of potential level. Businesses that have the potential to scale fast with great unit economics and just be hugely profitable at scale. And to believe that there's real customer demand there. And look, sometimes this can be pre-revenue and pre-product, but you have to try and find a way to believe, or otherwise, do I believe there could be like kind of crazy demand for this thing? You never know 100%, right? But you're trying to like tease those things out. So like I've talked about a lot of things there, but like in aggregate, those things are still no more than half of it. The founder is all the rest of it, or founders.
Right, right, totally. And you being from the AI field itself, you must be trying out a lot of these AI products just out of curiosity that, okay, what does this do, right? How often do you do that? Just curious on that. And what are the different kinds of things you're playing around with?
I'm going to basically use ChatGPT every day for just a whole variety of different things. I write a sort of monthly article for a local business magazine here, and I use it a lot for that. In fact, I did a LinkedIn post where I actually, because it was probably like a 50 or 100 question conversation with ChatGPT to get to the final answer, where I've done a chunk of editing in between. I think I started with a set of notes, and over time it helped me craft what the actual, you know, article was, and end up with it was still my article and very much written in my words and sending the message that I wanted to send with the narrative that I wanted. But there was a much better article at the end because I'd used it and I was able to produce it faster. I've used it to do bits of coding, and that's super interesting because I got it to like solve a few. I just had like these are like kind of toy projects, I would say, where I was like, I'm just going to see if it can do this. And I wasn't really doing any coding at all at the time. I had nothing set up on my laptop at all, and it literally took me through the whole process. Install this. You know, you need to add these libraries, and basically, whenever there was an error, you literally just copy and paste the error back into it, and it's like, oh, what about this, right? And so there were times when it ended up on a dead end, and I had to like Google Stack Overflow and find an answer, or I could see it had kind of boxed itself into a sort of an infinite loop. And I was like, okay, just take yourself out of that. But like 90 to 95% of it was doing its own error solving as well. So when there was a thing, you would just like literally copy and paste the error back in, and it would go, oh, okay, try this. And I think what's interesting about that is if it can do the error correction, then almost it can do. You could have set that up so it could do it all itself. So like you could set it up in an environment where it could update its own code and it could see the errors itself and had permission to like update code given that. I think today you'd probably want to go, do you want to update this code? Yes, no, and have a little pop up to just do it rather than automate the whole thing. But we're quite close to the whole, actually, it can just do everything. And this stuff is only going to get better. So I mean, if I want to go do research, I think you can treat it as a research assistant, but it's a research assistant where sometimes it's incredible and sometimes you're like, are you sure about that? And you have to be prepared to like read it and go, are you sure about that? And ask it the right kind of questions, which if you had a junior person doing research for you, you should be doing anyway. You shouldn't just be taking everything as read. So yeah, I mean, I use it a lot. It's incredibly helpful, and particularly for like a solo GP like me. There's a leveling of the playing field compared with sort of larger players where they might have like 5 juniors where they can go and set off and go go research this space, whereas I can go, well, okay, maybe I don't get quite as much detail as they do, but I can do a chunk of this if I'm smart about the way I use the product myself. So I think that's super interesting that gap shrinks.
Right, totally. That's very interesting. And I would like to ask you this: that when you said you wrote an entire article with the help of ChatGPT, and you
Mm-hmm.
kind of made it retain your original ideas and the narrative you wanted, right? And a lot of it comes down to prompt writing and how the feedback loop you create with it, right? So, give us an insight into that. That how do you do that? How big is the prompt? How's it structured? Would love any insights into that.
Yeah, so I think like I had a set of notes at the beginning, and I think the first question was, what narrative? Here are my notes. What's a narrative? Don't just write me an article, right? What narrative might work given those notes? And so then there was kind of a lot of back and forth on until I got to a narrative that I liked. And then I was like, okay, just produce me a draft. And then I would go edit the draft, or I would go, well, what about this question, whatever. And then I made some, at various points, I made some. I would be like, I'd copy and paste that into like a Google Doc, and I'd do some editing myself, make sure it sounded like me, and I'd sort of give it back to it and go, well, what's working and what isn't working here. And then sometimes I'd also go, actually, I want to update the narrative, for example, right? How might I do that to include this? Ask and say, again, don't give me an article yet. Make some suggestions as to how this might. I want to include this. Make some suggestions for how it might fit into the flow. And so it's very much I think, know what the stages are to get to the thing rather than trying to leap to it, and understand that it's a conversation rather than expecting it to do all the work. and then actually do just quiz it, because sometimes there was like a sentence and I was like, what sentence is that trying to say? And it would be this, and I'd be like, literally I would write in the chat, go, well, that all just seems actually quite vague, I'm not sure whether it says that. uh, uh, and you're literally having those sorts of conversations on individual sentences with it. And then there were some words which are like, I just, whether it's the ordering of a sentence or specific words, it's like, well, I just wouldn't say that, those aren't the words that I would use. Like, they might actually be better for the average person, but that just doesn't sound like me. And for you, if you were writing an article, those words might work for you, and it might be different words, right? Or different sentence. You're like, I don't really use that sentence construction. That doesn't feel like me. So you still end up with the narrative that you want, with the article having the personality of the person that is some writing, somewhat orchestrating, if you like. Um, and so I think it is this: don't just go, here's a prompt and expect to have everything. Understand that there are stages to this, and sort of go through them iteratively, and that it's a conversation. Don't be afraid to challenge it if you think it's wrong. All those things, but it's actually, I mean, it's still quite a lot of work, right? It's not a, this is what I want to write an article about, here are my notes, here's the prompt, just go do it. And it can do that, and that article will still be kind of okay, right? But it won't be yours.
Right, right. Totally. Yeah, that's a very important point there. I think because most people would just go write a prompt, expect an answer, and then judge it just based on that answer. That okay, is this good or is this not good? If it's not good, they just stop it. Okay, AI is not good. But the difference between working with a human and working with AI is that it will just do what you asked it to do and nothing else, right? Whereas a
Yep.
human can think of all the other things around it, what's the context and all that. The AI will not be able to think of those things, and you have to provide that context. So when that produces answer, you have to provide more context. That okay, I want to follow a different narrative, and I want to use simpler words, right? And
Yep.
different things like that, and then it can make it into something you wanted. So iteration is a big thing, and that any writer knows. Anyone who's a good writer knows that good writing is produced with iteration. It's not like you draft something and it's good to go, right? And it's the
Yep.
same with AI as well. Thanks for sharing that. That's very helpful. And you mentioned as a solo GP, chat GPT is helpful to you. It's almost like having multiple juniors, associates, and analysts that can do the work for you. What are the kind of things you're using it for currently, and where do you think it can really get the job done for you?
Some of this I'm still learning to use it, right? And it's getting better at the same time. So again, this is also a learning process, and I'm getting better at using these things. But there are, like, so you can do it for research, for competitor research, that kind of thing. It's a bit trickier, and so to do that, because you're working with, it's trying to only do a certain number of, like, maximum number of, like, internet searches each time when you do it, because they're trying to save their server time, etc. With OpenAI. But for example, if you're doing competitor research, there's one thing to go, this is what the company does, who else does that? The more interesting way to do it is to go, what problems does this company solve for its clients? And then go, well, okay, either what are the other ways to solve these problems, and then who's doing that? Because it's not always people that are doing exactly the same thing that are the competitors. So, for example, that's the sort of one of the ways that I might use it.
Right, totally. Very interesting. And talking about the VC landscape, how do you look at it currently? We had a certain environment up until now, and we very recently had, as of the date of recording, the Fed cuts very recently happened. So,
Mm-hmm.
how are you expecting that to impact the VC activity, if at all? Tell us that.
Um, so I think it doesn't affect it too much in the short term. What it does is affect the ability for, like, funds to raise, and how much capital there'll be going going forward, because you're always competing with, everyone's deciding what they do with their money. If interest rates are high, they don't really need to do anything to earn, to go, hey, I can beat inflation, I don't have to take any risk, etc. And so over time, the relative attractiveness of different asset classes changes, and when interest rates are higher, it's obviously, the bar is higher to go, I'm going to put my money into alternatives. But the feedback loop is slow, right? Because most funds have like let's say they have a 4-year cycle. That means that it's only when they come to raise again that it makes a difference to how much they're able to raise and how much they're able to deploy. So in general, the lower the interest rates, the easier it is for funds to raise, or for the more likely is, there's probably a faster feedback loops for angel investors, for angel investing, right? For people that are raising from those, but from the amount of money that's in the market from funds, which is most of it, certainly at later stages, then that feedback loop is a lot slower, but it's still real.
Right, absolutely. Thanks for sharing your views on that. And so, talking about returns, which are kind of the most important things for VCs to generate returns, what do you think is the biggest factor that impacts the kind of returns a VC is able to generate?
So I mean, that's a like very broad ranging question. I know you framed it with biggest, but I mean, there's typically three different things going on. And one is access to opportunities. Two is your just ability to choose. And access is not just how many things you see, it's the quality of the things you see, and if a deal's competitive, whether or not you're going to get into it, right? When the founders themselves are maybe doing the choosing. So access, choosing, like insanely important, but like and those two probably equally important. Like if you see all the things in the world but you're bad at choosing, you're still going to choose badly. If you're great at choosing but you don't see anything, I mean, you still can't win because you haven't seen any of the good things. And the other one is, how much you're able to help your portfolio companies. And every sort of investor out there is trying to help them, but I think that's actually a smaller. And I'm the same. I like to help my portfolio companies when I can. If they want to get on with it, they get on with it, and if they want some help, I'm there for them. In practice, that's a smaller aspect than I think most VCs would want you to believe. They want to tell their investors a story that, hey, we help more than anybody else does. In practice, all those people are super busy. They've got a portfolio of things. The amount of time they're going to put into that business, even if they're incredible, is still going to be tiny compared to the amount of time a founder is putting into it. And so really, it helps, but it helps more at the margins than it does. It's unlikely to be the thing that makes a difference between something winning and losing.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. I do think that VC is more of being the cheerleader and making those connections. And when you move over to the PE stage, then it becomes more of operating and things like that. But VCs who say that, okay, us helping founders is actually making big changes for them. I don't believe that. It has to be down to the founder and how they run the business. You can be having the supporting role for sure. Uh, awesome. And talking about, are there any AI companies at this point, besides the big ones that everyone knows about, that you're particularly excited about?
So I like actually some. So in terms of specific companies, um, I think sort of foundation model. I think largely we're done, right? It's possible something else comes out where it's like vertical specific, but there's a load of them out there. They've all got insane amounts of money. Some of them won't make it. And actually, that's fine because that's how venture works, that not everything makes it. And then the ones that do generate enough returns on them. But my instinct is we have enough foundational models out there. There's a huge amount of money being thrown at them. There needs to be a good reason for a new one to be out there to have a chance of of winning. And then it's just a question of what you're building. And I just think there are lots of opportunities. The most obvious one, and I know I said I'm not picking one, but the ones that I'm watching, if you like, are the ones that are helping you to code. Either helping you to code or just helping you to build. Even if you don't write the code yourself, they're just helping you build software, right? So that less and less do you have to code yourself. And it's for those reasons that we talked about, where it's like, actually, will every software developer be 5 or 10 times as productive? Something has to enable them to get there. Like a product has to enable them to get there. It could be that's an open AI and it just comes straight out of GPT-7 or 8, or it could be actually, and there's a number of specialist companies that do this, that are like, okay, we're the ones that are making it easy to. But actually, one of the reasons I'm watching them is because I want to use them. I think I want to use them and see what I can make with them, and that's why it's interesting, right? Like that anyone you get to the point where like you do not need to have quite as much technical knowledge to be able to build something where a little is helpful, but that's enough. Like the world is in just a super interesting place when that happens, and so I'm watching that very closely.
Right. Are there any names on that front? You think any company is doing a good job at that?
Uh, yes and no, but like I'm not gonna. So I don't know. So there's one or two that I'm sort of watching, but there are also a lot more that I don't know about. So like Cursor is one that I'm sort of watching. Codium is one that I know about. I know someone who's there, one of the sort of software developers there. But there are probably like 10 or 20 others that I don't know about, but I am just watching that space with interest. So
Right. Right, totally. I'm just asking because I'm not a coder myself. So if I find a tool which can do that part of the job for me, that'd be great for me. Awesome.
yeah.
So moving on to the last main question before we move over to close this out, and this one is about what's been your biggest learning investing in startups.
What's been my biggest learning investing in startups? This is a direct answer to the question, but it's not the one that you're expecting, which is that I actually learned a lot from all the founders that I've met and that I've talked to and that I've invested in. And I hope that I've picked up some of the skills just from watching and seeing the way that they operate. And so I'm not going to say I'm as good as like some of the best ones that are out there, but effectively, I'm kind of a startup VC, and I'm trying to develop my own sort of startup and founder skills myself. So almost my biggest learning has not been about investing; it's about how to be a founder myself that I've learned from other founders.
Right. Awesome. To close this out, I'll ask you like 3 quick questions about the investing you're doing, and you have to give 3 quick answers, right?
Okay.
So the first one is, what are the sectors and regions you're investing in?
Okay, so digital tech, pre-seed and seed, largely UK, but that's because it's where most of my deal flow is from, rather than a bias against anywhere else in the world.
Noted. And the next question was about the typical stage, but you mentioned pre-seed and seed.
Yeah.
I'll move over to the last one. Where can our listeners follow you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. If you search for Marc, M-A-R-C, Cohen, it's the one which is /Mark Nigel Cohen, or Twitter or X /Unbundled VC, all one word. You can find me there. And I post, I'm very active in posting content, so that you might like that or you might not.
Right, totally. Very interesting post on your LinkedIn. I'll make sure to put the link in the show notes below so that our listeners can get there. Thank you so much, Marc, for doing this with us. It's been amazing hosting you and getting all those insights from an insider in the AI field. So thank you.
And thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it, Prashant.
Thank you. My pleasure.